Welcome to Chapter 11 video presentation. This chapter constitutes part 2 of a broader topic of conducting procurements. This video presentation, just like all video presentations in this course, are based on the book by Quinton Fleming titled Project Procurement Management, Contracting, Subcontracting, Teaming. As usual, we'll start with the learning objectives or learning outcomes for this course. After completing Chapter 11, you should be able to explain why ethics is important in procurements. Also, you should be able to list and briefly discuss the main goals of a cost and price analysis group. You should also be able to explain the difference between cost and price analysis. Explain how late proposals are handled, explain how and why unsolicited proposals are made and how they're handled by buyers. Explain how and why alternate non-responsive proposals are made and how they're handled by buyers. Also, after completing Chapter 11, you should be able to list and briefly discuss some considerations in forming procurement teams. You should be able to list and briefly discuss the main functions of a procurement team, explain how negotiation teams are formed and managed, explain the role of management approval in finalizing procurements, and also explain what typically happens after contract is awarded. Now we'll start with a brief discussion on ethics in procurement. Ethics is very important in procurement because being in charge of procurements puts a person in a unique position to illegally enrich himself or herself. Now there are many names for those illegal practices, and some of those practices and names are listed here: kickbacks, personal gifts, graft, and so forth. So for example, a kickback means as a person in charge of buying something for an organization, as a buyer, you agree to buy from a specific vendor or seller in exchange for a kickback, a certain percentage of that contract going back to you from the vendor, once the vendor receives money. So a certain percentage of that contract will go back to you as a buyer, and you will pocket that money for your own personal gain. Personal gift, self-explanatory. You're a buyer in charge of a particular procurement, and one potential vendor, sends you on a vacation or gives you some expensive gifts as a part of the negotiation process or procurement process. And then, based on those valuable gifts, you decide to go ahead and work with that particular vendor by pulling certain strings within the organization. By the way, in a lot of government offices, I think the rule is that as a government employee, you cannot accept any gifts in excess of $50. So anything above $50, is considered to be, a criminal, illegal activity. But even beyond that, we'll talk about it later. If you want to be in a good standing within your company, whether it's a government branch or private organization, and you want to avoid certain suspicion and certain ethical dilemmas, then don't accept anything from partners, from potential vendors. Then graft is another form of corruption where a government official somehow misdirects, misappropriates government funds by doing or not doing certain things, so that those funds go into businesses that are somehow affiliated with this government official or benefit the government official in some other way. Now, for those reasons, for the reason we just discussed, where being in charge of procurements puts a person in a unique situation for self-enrichment. So for those reasons, purchasing authority is often not given to a project manager, but to a buyer, purchasing agent, or contracting officer. This is the job title often used in government organizations, to separate that authority of buying and then using the services or products that were procured in a project, to put a project manager away from that temptation. Now, another thing that makes purchasing professionals more reliable, at least in some situations, is that purchasing professionals typically have to go through annual certification or clearance to make sure they don't have any illegal connections with the seller, so they go through some sort of a background check. Now, some illegal dealings are very subtle, so it's sometimes you may not even understand that what you're doing is questionable, unethical, or illegal. So try to avoid those kind of situations altogether. And one way to avoid those situations is buy your own lunches. Don't go to dinners with potential vendors. Not only the dinner can be expensive. Let's say if you're government employed, it can well be in excess of $50. That will create an illegal, I guess, an illegal transaction on your side. Overall, going through those dinners may somehow create an unfair personal relationship between you and a vendor, and who knows where that relationship will lead you, right? What kind of other transactions will be initiated based on the things that you discuss or agree during a dinner. Yeah, don't give any valuable gifts, don't accept any offers for anything. Just stay away from any kind of personal relationship with a potential buyer or seller to avoid potentially serious situations. And then, yeah, perceptions are as important as actual deeds. So, let's say you go to lunch with a potential vendor, and then you don't accept any gifts during that lunch. You pay for your own lunch, but people may still perceive you to be biased because somehow you went out with this particular vendor. So they will spread rumors that you agreed to something, they gave you something for that. So it's better to avoid those situations altogether, and it's even better to legally separate those responsibilities so that you don't become a target of potentially unethical vendors in the first place. So as a project manager, you may actually be in a better position to give the procurement authority to somebody else, so you don't have this legal and ethical headache on the top of your primary responsibilities as a project manager. Now, before awarding a major contract, an organization may want to do the so-called price cost analysis. This analysis is often performed by the so-called cost and price analysis group. So the goal of this group is to make sure costs are reasonable given the market, the industry, and materials used. Oftentimes, this analysis uncovers unnecessary cost, meaning this analysis can uncover the fact that somebody, meaning a vendor, is trying to overcharge you as a buyer. Quite often, outside consultants are hired to perform this analysis as well, so that they are, in a position to be more objective when evaluating cost. Now, price and cost analysis, they're very similar, but they address this issue from two different angles, two different sides. As the names of those analysis techniques suggest. So price analysis look at the price, while cost analysis looks at the individual cost breakdown. Although the two techniques have a lot of overlap, because at the heart of both approaches is looking at the potential, is valuing potential work items comprising a contract. So let's talk about price analysis. Fixed price work often does not include a detailed breakdown of cost. So if you only have like a fixed price quote and you don't understand how this fixed price quote was created, what you can do bottom line cost estimates to approximate the price. In other words, you'll break that project down into specific work items yourself, and then you will try to estimate the cost associated with each of those work items to see whether the price is reasonable. But sometimes an RFP actually requires a very detailed response so that the price, the final price in response is based on specific individual cost estimates. So in that case, you will look at individual cost items, you will see how reasonable those cost estimates are, and whether all those costs sum up, add up to a reasonable price. By the way, this analysis is not just for detecting cost inefficiencies or unfair prices. It can also be used to determine whether the price is feasible and whether the seller knows what it takes to deliver on the contract. So this analysis is about two things: making sure that you don't get overcharged, but also making sure that whoever is bidding on your project is not artificially creating a low price so that you agree to it, and then you will discover that the price is just too low and there is no way a product or service with adequate quality can be delivered given that price. So it's looking at deviations from a reasonable price in both directions, positive and negative. Now, cost analysis involves a detailed analysis and comparison of every cost item on a cost reimbursable or time and material contract. So it's pretty much the same technique. It also looks at the question of whether the price charge is reasonable, but it's more cost centric, right? So you're looking at individual costs rather than trying to look at the final price and break it down into individual cost. So So yeah, and that typically happens during procurements that are based on cost reimbursable or time and materials contract. So those are some of the things that you can do to perform cost analysis. You can analyze labor rates by job code, so you'll find codes for the professionals performing a particular job, and then try to find the market wages for those job categories to see whether those labor rates are reasonable or not. You may also estimate indirect if it's something that is an indirect rate. It's not like a clear like man-hour type of arrangement. For example, if you're talking about the consulting arrangement, then some kind of research period or preparation for this consulting arrangement is something that is not like objective. It cannot be objectively expressed in man hours. So you'll try to estimate it on your own to see whether those estimates are reasonable. Administrative expenses are often analyzed as a percentage of total costs. So let's say the industry standard is that administrative expenses are 15% of the total cost. And you'll compare their administrative expenses to this rule of thumb estimate. Some parameters can be scrutinized too, such as learning improvements. For example, if it's a long-term contract that you may ask why you are charging a uniform labor rate throughout the duration of the project. You will learn something, you'll become more efficient. Then scrap percentages, in other words, how much of the material will be wasted, can be evaluated or scrutinized too. So all in all, cost analysis attempts to verify whether costs are current, complete, and reasonable. Oftentimes, independent cost estimates are used to validate them. Management may hire a consultant to perform independent cost estimates. Sometimes a consultant will do the estimation based on the RFP without looking at the RFP response. So the consultants will act as one of the theoretical vendors and try to estimate how much it would cost for the consultant, for this hypothetical vendor to deliver based on the information contained in the RFP. It is very common in construction, but it's a very fuzzy area in IT because information technology products, or most of the information technology products, especially if it's something related to software, they are by definition an intangible product. An intangible product cannot be often subjected to those simple types of analysis that some of the physical products are subjected to. So laying bricks where you can count the number of bricks needed, the number of people needed based on their performance rate can be relatively straightforward, but laying bricks is not the same as writing code because it's more of an intellectual, creative, artistic activity. So a lot of the techniques that are applicable for, let's say, for the construction industry may not be applicable for the IT industry. Just like it was, as we mentioned previously, the goal is not to find a true cost. What's the ideal cost or what's the precise cost, but rather to find abnormalities, because nobody knows what those true costs are. But if it's something that is too low or too high, that's an abnormality, and that's probably a result of some sort of dishonesty or unintentional gross inefficiency. So those cases need to be investigated deeper. Now, there's a special issue of late seller proposals. Some organizations do not accept late proposals, and it is government organizations that are typically more rigid. They don't accept any proposals after the deadline, but private organizations may consider late proposals if they are good. Because the main goal for any organization is to complete the project successfully, and everything else should come secondary. So even if they finish their selection process, they may still look at the late proposals if they make sense and help complete the project successfully. But one way to make it fair to everybody, if you're accepting late proposals, then extend the deadline for everybody so that, let's say, sellers who submitted their proposals previously can resubmit, or additional sellers who think they would like to participate in the bidding process can submit their proposals as well. Another special issue is unsolicited proposals. Sometimes sellers can find out about what you need without you formally advertising it. How do they do that? Well, sometimes the word gets out that your organization is working on something, and other vendors may hear that news and capitalize on that. They will say, hey, I know you're building something like a new campus. You will need air conditioning. That's how I can help you. This is what I'm selling. This is what I'm offering. Sometimes executives discuss things informally, but then these discussions result in formal proposals. By the way, unsolicited proposals can be a great source of new ideas. So it's somebody else who's thinking on your behalf and offering you sometimes a creative solution. So instead of launching a formal process, the two organizations may sit down and negotiate an agreement and start working together based on that unsolicited proposals, or there can be a formal solicitation process initiated based on the idea contained in that unsolicited proposal. Although that may be a bit unfair because somebody took time and initiative to give you some valuable ideas, and then you will simply say, okay, thank you very much, and now we'll subject your proposal to competition. Now, sometimes when you solicit responses to an RFP, you will get the so-called alternate or non-responsive proposals. So, for example, a seller will look at your RFP and decide not to respond to it directly. Instead, the seller comes forward with an alternate proposal. They may think that this alternate proposal may be better in terms of technical characteristic or cost. They will say, okay, we understand what you want, but we have a better idea. It's something that you haven't thought about. Sometimes this may launch a formal solicitation process where, based on this new idea, you will create a new RFP and ask vendors to resubmit. But quite often, the two parties involved may sit down and negotiate an agreement and start working together. Of course, giving that this alternate or non-responsive proposal makes a lot of sense and seems to be very good for the project. Now, there are some issues in negotiating final contracts. Many organizations have professional negotiators housed in organizations or departments or units with such keywords as contracts, proposal, legal department, and some other names. One of the most important issues is that the negotiating team should have the necessary authority. Personally, I've been in situations where somebody is negotiating on behalf of an organization, and then later on you find out that this person does not have this authority to negotiate, and all this person does is just runs back and forth between himself and whoever has that authority. So then the question becomes, why not include this person in negotiations directly, as opposed to talking to a bunch of people and then waiting for a response from the real decision maker. But if a negotiation team is formed, it needs to have a single leader, somebody who makes final decisions, otherwise it will be a mess. Before the negotiation process starts, the overall negotiating strategy should be agreed upon by all members comprising the negotiating team. You don't want to start discussing your differences and different ideas during the negotiation process. You need to be on the same page. You need to be like as one single team. So some questions that can be answered before the negotiation process starts by all team members are as follows. What do we need as a team? What are we trying to achieve? How far are we willing to go to accommodate the other side? Like, what's our absolutely last boundary that we will not go over, right? So all those things should be discussed and agreed upon before the negotiation process starts. Now, there's also something called best and final offer. Sometimes at the conclusion of all negotiations, when a buyer is about to sign a contract, the buyer will ask all remaining sellers to submit their best and final offer. So I guess this is like a way of twisting arms of everybody. So, that may result in a better proposal. So this contract that you're about to sign will be discarded, and you start working with another vendor. And oftentimes, best and final offer trick is price-centered. As I said, it's all about lowering the price. But other factors might come into play, like schedule, warranty, options. So it doesn't have to be necessarily, the best and final offer technique is not necessarily for twisting the arms of vendors in terms of price. It can be for twisting their arms in relation to other considerations like schedule, warranty, options, and product features. It was mentioned before that it is not necessary to form a procurement team for buying commodities. In fact, a lot of purchasing in relation to commodities, or even fairly complicated products, is often automated with software such as MRPs and ERPs. But if you're procuring something complex, or if you're working under a corporate teaming arrangement, then you don't need to form a multifunctional procurement team so that you have a variety of expertise and you have people with different views and different levels of authority included on those teams. The composition of the procurement team will depend on project manager and his or her authority and expertise. So if project manager feels that all the authority is within his or her hands, then the team might be smaller. If the project manager feels that he or she has enough technical expertise among the team members, then some external technical specialists may not include it. But in general, the rule is to include all relevant stakeholders from a knowledge standpoint, meaning those stakeholders should contribute their expertise to the procurement team, but also from the authority standpoint. I mean, you don't want to exclude somebody important who has power over your procurement arrangements so that later on this person starts sabotaging your procurement process. Now, once a procurement team is formed, their mission, their most important goals include the following: to organize and plan for procurement, to define legal contractual documents that are used in procurement, to formally implement the contractual arrangements, to monitor, manage, and conclude the performance of the procurements. So all those are important goals or tasks of a procurement team. Now, some comments about source selection and management approval. Selection of sellers should be based on previously established criteria, something that happens at the procurement planning stage. And then the source selection committee should evaluate sellers' proposals based on these criteria. Now, even if you have a committee involved in evaluating proposals based on these criteria, in most organizations, top management makes the final choice. And sometimes top management wants the committee to make several recommendations so that the best one can be approved by top management. And some people may think that getting a top management approval of final say is not a big deal, it's just a signature. In reality, it may take time because a top manager may be busy or may be dealing with other political considerations that you haven't thought about as a team. Now, what happens between a contract award and a go-ahead when the vendor actually starts working on this project, on this procurement item? Now, the thing is, management approval and contract award do not necessarily initiate work on the seller side. I mean, there needs to be some time. Some time will pass, and typically the actual work is delayed until a formal kickoff meeting. So this allows for some time for the buyer to address some of the last-minute issues, and also you need to understand that from the planning perspective. I mean, just because you award the contract today does not mean the work on the contract will start today or tomorrow. It may take some time before the actual work commences. So this completes Chapter 11 video presentation.